SCP-8980 Ergophobia Without Regards Part 2. Ergophobia is, as you possibly had guessed if you watched Part 1, a persistent fear of work, employment, or the workplace. The Foundation is meant to be a place of security and order, where rules upon rules and oversight are meant to ensure that everything remains safe and secure. Of course, as the saying goes, rules are meant to be broken, and a person determined enough with enough lack of oversight could bend and break rules without much repercussion. That's the tragedy of Lillian Marley, who not only has the extreme misfortune to be labeled as an anomaly, but whose overseer is precisely such an individual. In Part 1, her tragedy was mostly concerned with being uprooted from her normal life within the Foundation and thrown into containment, but now, her nightmare is truly beginning. Let's take a look. We pick things up with an in-universe content warning from the Ethics Committee, informing us that the remainder of the file represents a severe and continued violation of the Foundation's Code of Conduct policy, so we know things are about to get pretty serious. On June 8, 2005, 2 weeks after being prescribed remedial therapy, Dr. Burns conducted a follow-up interview with Lillian to reassess the containment efforts and ensure her well-being. She had continued to display lowered engagement with her employment at the Foundation, often missing deadlines, failing to clock into work despite living in her work environment, and producing more errors. Additionally, while she had been seen engaging in socialization with other anomalies, most of these interactions were superficial and presumably unsatisfying, possibly indicating depressive symptoms. To be fair, unless it was SCP-999, I don't know how much I'd enjoy interacting with other anomalies either. At the start of the interview, Lillian is holding her head up on a plastic folding table in her cell. Her bed is unmade, and a trash can in the corner of the room is entirely filled with diet soft drinks, although the Ethics Committee notes that putting such details in the file is unnecessary. Burns enters the room, placing the audio recording device on the desk and turning it on. He states that he's beginning the interview log with SCP-8980 at 10:02 a.m., and greets her by her designation, causing Lillian to burst out in hysterical laughter. She remarks that they must have given him quite the beating, as she never thought she'd see him act so professional. Burns just smiles and says that he supposes he's a changed man now, as he realized that he's done very little to minimize conflict in their workplace environment. From now on, he'll be following the Foundation guidelines down to the letter, and he hopes that this should be enough for them to maintain professionalism between them in the future. Lillian just says that she'll see it when she believes it, as she wasn't born yesterday, and knows that he hasn't changed a bit. Burns smiles again and says to not worry, as she'll see it. She lets out an exasperated, dry laugh as he places several documents on the desk. He tells her that for today's agenda, he wants to speak with her about her workplace environment, the possibility of psychological assistance, and future testing protocols. She begins to argue about psychological assistance before realizing that he mentioned testing, and she slams her fist on the desk, standing up. She yells that no, absolutely not, she won't do any more testing. Burns calmly elaborates, saying that it's quite clear from her request for reassessment that she's very discontent with her current working arrangements. Lillian freezes, as she likely wasn't aware that her RFR was shown to Burns before the committee got it, but she nods. Burns says that with additional testing, they should be able to figure out some more amenable conditions for her to work in. She swears at him, saying that she doesn't have a choice in this, but he states that technically she does, as according to the Foundation Code of Conduct, she's free to deny testing if it's not being conducted for security concerns, normalcy enforcement, or termination of subject. He tells her to let him know by Monday whether she wishes to abort testing, and he'll send her the relevant paperwork to fill out. Code of conduct doesn't quite allow him to decline testing based on verbal request, and he needs to give her 3 business days' notice for her to withdraw consent in writing. He does wish to inform her, though, that he personally believes testing is very much in her best interest, especially based on what she's told him in the past and her present mental state. She replies that something that would help her mental state is not having him run her testing, but he says that unfortunately he is required by the Code of Conduct to at least have some oversight role in any experimentation carried out on her. He'd also like to sign her up for Site-17's parapsychological counseling program, but she interrupts him, saying that she doesn't want a therapist and there's nothing wrong with her. Burns just smiles again and says, okay, but to remember that the offer's on the table. She asks if that's everything, and if he can leave now. He replies that that's everything, and he'll be sure to get the relevant documentation to her, but he highly recommends that she doesn't file it though. The Ethics Committee notes that he should not have provided his own opinion on whether Lillian should deny testing or not. Burns then extends his hand, and Lillian shakes it, although the committee notes again that the video footage shows her hesitating for several seconds before doing so, and that should have been noted. Afterwards, Burns notes that Lillian's reluctance to therapy and continued testing is most probably due to the depressive symptoms they've been seeing from her accommodated working environment. He firmly believes that additional testing will help them identify additional ways they can improve her environment, or in lieu of that, help them understand the basis for the anomaly further. He would like to reiterate that their team is working diligently to improve her conditions, and while they cannot control her reaction to her containment, they can try their best to ensure she is as comfortable as possible with her new role. After several days of waiting for her to submit appropriate documentation, she reluctantly agreed to participate in necessary and purposeful testing of her anomalous properties in order to work towards a more productive work environment. We're given an abridged list of tests, with the Ethics Committee noting that the full quantity of tests conducted, numbering 36 separate experiments, was severely excessive of what was reasonably required. One test involved Lillian warming up a standard Foundation ration using a microwave oven with no electronic interfaces. The microwave's radiation ended up being significantly higher than normal, resulting in the ration violently exploding inside. Burns notes that it appears as though electronic circuitry is susceptible to her effects, despite the lack of electronic interface. The effect extends even to regular equipment as well, which justifies the strict oversight of her movement through the site. In another experiment, she was instructed to use an experimental speech-to-text transcriber that was located in a separate room to fulfill various prompts, which would then be printed out afterwards using an analog system. The electronic transcriber began to misrepresent various words that she spoke in a manner consistent with its known anomalous properties. It's unclear if this was partially due to the transcriber's general inaccuracy or influenced by the anomalous effect. Burns writes that electronic components which she has direct contact with, even if she can't see them, still appear to malfunction. This definitely limits their options even further than they already were, and if they're going to find some alternative system, they'll have to be creative. In another test, an inactive Dell desktop computer was placed in her containment cell, and she was instructed not to use or interact with it at all. Despite not interacting with it, it repeatedly activated, playing the Windows XP startup sound, which repeatedly and audibly startled her. She refused to touch or turn off the device after startup, even when requested to by experiment overseers. After the 23rd activation at approximately 15 hours into the experiment, she began sobbing uncontrollably, terminating the test. Burns writes that while this experiment was disruptive for SCP-8980, it helps them further narrow down why their alternative systems don't quite work. Interaction does not seem to be a prerequisite for the anomaly's activation, only her general proximity. In the last test, she was brought to a connected testing chamber and instructed to communicate with junior researcher Morgan McFarrell, who was in a separate room. He was instructed to follow her directions while interacting with a Dell desktop computer, taking caution not to communicate back to her except through written notes passed through a slot in the wall. While the experiment was running, no noted effects occurred, but roughly 45 minutes into the experiment, Lillian vomited onto the floor of the chamber and began sobbing uncontrollably. Both were extracted from the rooms, and the experiment concluded early. The documentation notes that she vomited profusely during routine testing, with the ethics committee commenting that the testing was not routine, and she was immediately hospitalized in Site 17's West Wing. After objective analysis, it was largely determined that she did not suffer from a known paramedical or medical condition, and her issues were likely due to cumulative stress, depressive symptoms, and disorientation from a lack of proper nutrition. She was discharged back to her containment unit the following day, although it would have been prudent for medical staff to hold her for several days to properly diagnose any underlying medical or mental disorders. Despite being discharged, she refused continued testing, citing her hospitalization as a reason for suspension of experimentation. The ethics committee adds the word valid before reason, noting that her reason was entirely valid under the then-present circumstances, according to the Foundation Code of Conduct. She also refused to leave her cell and experienced severe lethargy for several days, resulting in very little production or socialization during this time. Eventually, Burns conducted an intervention interview with her to address the issues she was facing. She's sitting in her containment chamber with her arms hugging onto her sides, staring downwards and directly ahead without moving, until Burns enters, causing her to glare up at him. Her breathing pace can be seen briefly quickening before returning to her baseline. Burns sets down the recorder and turns it on, greeting her, but she doesn't respond. He continues, stating that their first topic for today is the medical incident that occurred during the last experiment involving Mr. McFarrell. He comments that that's who was on the other side of the wall, and she should remember him as he helped finish the manifold problem. She still doesn't respond, just staring directly at Burns. He asks her if it's alright if he just asks a few routine questions, but she simply responds with a no. He replies that he supposes he's not allowed to push her to answer medical questions against her will, so he'll drop the issue for now. He begins to move on to the next item on their agenda, but Lillian lets out a long, exasperated sigh before asking what day it is. Burns replies that it's a Tuesday, but she wants to know the date. He briefly glances around the chamber, commenting that she doesn't have a calendar, and he supposes he'll arrange to get her one later. The ethics committee notes that he never did during the duration of her containment. He reaches for his phone, but realizes that he doesn't have it on him, as the rules don't allow him to bring one in here. He believes that it's around the 22nd of August, shocking her, and she begins to hyperventilate, abruptly standing up. She shouts that she's been in here for 6 months, and Burns says that he's afraid so, as they have unfortunately made little progress in neutralizing her anomaly. She continues to hyperventilate as Burns asks her to calm down, and she clutches her head, muttering to herself. Burns remains at the table, keeping a steady gaze on her as she continues. She screams, then sobs loudly, then lowers herself onto the floor, continuing to sob for several minutes while Burns remains at the table. He eventually says that she knows he's not trying to hurt her, and the experiments can be a lot, but ultimately they've made some progress. She begs for him to just shut up and be quiet, but he continues, saying that they're all just trying to help her, and while their progress has been slow, they're guaranteed at their current rate to make a breakthrough within a year or two. Unfortunately, this comment didn't go over as well as he might have thought, and she stares in horror at him, slowly rising to her feet. She repeats the word no over and over, saying that he's not helping her, and he's not helping anyone, and she tells him to leave. Burns begins to calmly polish his glasses, stating that he's not going to leave until they cover the full agenda, and he is here to help her, even if she doesn't understand that yet. She approaches the table and tells him that she's not doing this anymore. She's not playing his sick games, and she can't do this for another 6 months, let alone a year. She would rather die than do another useless experiment overseen by his egotistical, narcissistic, misogynistic, smug face. Of course, she used quite a few expletives that I'm leaving out. The Ethics Committee notes that Lillian did call him misogynistic, but Burns didn't transcribe that word into the document. He attempts to calm her down, referring to her as SCP-8980, but she balls her fists into her face before screaming. She then lunges at Burns over the table, knocking them both to the floor as Burns yells out in terror. She screams that her name is Lillian Marley, and she pins him to the floor as she begins to frantically search. Burns shouts for her to get off of him, and the two continue to struggle until she finds the key to her containment unit on the floor. As she stretches to grab it, Burns manages to free himself, sending her to the floor before she can grab the key. She yelps in pain as Burns reflexively kicks her in the chest. He then pulls himself back to his feet, and as Lillian attempts to pull herself up, Burns kicks her in the chest again. The document states that he kicks her in self-defense, but the Ethics Committee notes that this action has been determined to be excessive, even in the circumstances they occurred in, constituting retroactive, explicit abuse of an anomaly. His kick sends her spiraling into Burns' chair, and she screams and begins sobbing uncontrollably as she hits the floor. Burns spends several seconds panting and staring at her before picking up the keys to the unit and his now shattered glasses. He leaves the room, leaving the recording equipment behind, and Lillian makes no effort to acknowledge his exit nor an attempt to follow him out of the room. Instead, she sobs and groans softly on the floor, slowly curling herself into a fetal position. After several minutes, site security is alerted and responds to the situation, with a female security officer arriving and placing Lillian in handcuffs with little resistance. It's noted that Burns misgendered the security officer in the incident report. The officer placed her on the bed, erected the table and chairs, and finally disabled the recording before exiting and re-securing the chamber. In the aftermath of the incident, it became clear that Lillian's psychological state had deteriorated significantly, to the point of engaging in active hostility against Foundation staff. This necessitated Foundation intervention for both her safety and her containment personnel, so several measures were immediately enacted by Burns in compliance with the Code of Conduct. She was classified as a potentially hostile entity, requiring approval from containment staff to be interacted with. Her free roam time was reduced, with further restrictions to her movement at the site to minimize future incidents. She was also assigned to mandatory in-person parapsychological counseling, and was required to undergo Level 3 intensity security measures for humanoids. The Ethics Committee notes that this level of security requires security cameras to be placed in their containment cell, additional restrictions on what recreational items they may be allowed to request, and weekly room searches to prevent contraband possession. It's their opinion that this was extremely excessive for the circumstances, though not technically in violation of the Foundation's Code of Conduct. After implementing the new procedures, Dr. Burns was requested by Site-17 administration to distance himself from handling 8980's case. He complied, but it's noted that he was highly agitated by his removal and consistently put pressure on Site-17's senior staff to remain head researcher over 8980. After several weeks of searching for a replacement without result, the site director signed off on the retainment of Burns as head researcher, citing his prior professionalism and expertise in handling 8980's tantrums. It's noted by the Ethics Committee that the so-called search took place over several days, not weeks, and the only possible candidates for the replacement were other members of 8980's research team, of which Dr. Steele had no interest, and junior researcher McFarrell was underqualified for. When confronted with evidence regarding Burns' inappropriate prior actions, the site director claimed complete ignorance to nearly all of the events detailed in this document, and while this is considered extremely unlikely due to his central role on the Site-17 Containment Oversight Committee, no concrete evidence had been found that he intentionally violated the Code of Conduct. For 3 days following the incident, Lillian was given medical treatment for her wounds before being returned to her containment chamber. Her first parapsychological counseling session was scheduled for September 5th, 2005, and would occur every Monday under Dr. Nadine Crawford. Crawford was a prominent parapsychologist working for Site-17 who came into contact with a significant amount of anomalous clients after obtaining her degree in Portland, due to her clinic's proximity to the Three Portlands nexus. She has generally been described as thoughtful, compassionate, and patient by most of the anomalies put under her care in the past, but several incidents demonstrating grossly inappropriate behavior throughout her career resulted in the Foundation terminating her employment in 2013. This includes a particularly grievous incident in 2012, involving a romantic relationship with a male anomaly under her care that ultimately resulted in it committing suicide in containment. Based on evidence obtained by the Ethics Committee review team, it's suspected that Crawford had close personal ties with Dr. Burns. Initially, the sessions Lillian had with Crawford made very little progress, as she had a strong negative reaction towards the therapy process. This continued throughout the month, but an eventual initial breakthrough was achieved on September 26th, when she began to speak with Dr. Crawford in a meaningful capacity for the first time. During the session, Crawford has been doing miscellaneous paperwork in silence, while Lillian struggles to stay awake on the couch, with both disheveled clothes and hair. She then pushes herself further up the couch, presumably to help her stay awake better, and Crawford comments on how comfortable the couch is. Lillian looks at her and replies that it's nice. Crawford remarks that that couch is actually anomalous, prompting an incredulous expression from Lillian. She explains that its fabric was made by a thaumaturgic clothes maker who produced a lot of their higher quality materials. She actually met him once, back when she worked in Portland, but she can't elaborate much because of client confidentiality. It's noted that due to the relaxed regulations for parapsychologists employed by the Foundation, she could have actually disclosed relevant information if she had reason to suspect that it would have aided in helping Lillian. She comments that she thinks his designation at the Foundation is 8580, calling it a neat coincidence, although it's noted that that's the former designation for that anomaly, who was molecularly annihilated during a workplace accident in 1993. Lillian grunts and folds her arms, stating that she wishes she could sleep in a chair like this every night. Crawford sits up in her chair and asks what makes her say that. Lillian replies after several seconds that she misses her bed, the one from her dorm here, as apparently the mattress didn't fit into the concrete block they call a bed frame. Crawford asks her if she's having a harder time sleeping because of it, and Lillian appears to recoil slightly, although it's unclear if this was due to attempting to keep herself awake or if the comment somehow provoked her. She shakes her head vigorously and says that it's fine, she's over it now. Crawford tells her that if she likes, she can let her nap for a bit here each session, and Lillian shortly thereafter falls asleep as Crawford returns to her paperwork, smiling. After waking up, Lillian continued to deflect conversational attempts until the end of the session, but over the course of multiple meetings, she began to engage in small talk more with Crawford, establishing some level of rapport between them. Topics of conversation frequently included Lillian's current projects, novels she had read in the past, or other miscellaneous yet irrelevant topics. It's noted that this information is a violation of privacy and should be kept vague unless demonstrating an important breakthrough or highlighting an important interaction. While her mental state did not significantly improve for some time, she began to trust Crawford as the sessions progressed, which eventually led to Crawford being able to discuss Lillian's past, representing an important milestone in reconstructing her mental state. In another session, Lillian is sitting on a couch in Crawford's office. Her appearance is still highly disheveled, and she fidgets in place absent-mindedly. Crawford is busy writing notes at her desk when Lillian suddenly asks her how long she's been working here. Crawford sits up and smiles at her, telling her that she's been here for about 2.5 decades by this point. She then asks Lillian how long she's been working at the Foundation, causing Lillian to let out a dry laugh. She replies that she doesn't think this was part of her contract, and Crawford apologizes for violating any of her boundaries. Lillian makes an inscrutable sound and sinks into the couch, silent for several seconds before saying that it's fine, and she's been working for the Foundation for 6 to 7 years now, after getting her degree. Crawford asks what degree, causing Lillian to sit up straight on the couch and make eye contact with her briefly. She says that it's nothing impressive. She got hired after getting her bachelor's degree in computer science. Crawford clasps her hands together and says that that's quite the accomplishment, especially for a girl her age, confusing Lillian. She apologizes and explains that it's quite the achievement to be scouted by the Foundation in your early 20s, as she's only known a few who have that honor, most of them being men in financing. Lillian appears stoic in response at first, but then briefly laughs, saying that she appreciates it. Her old boss wasn't very impressed, meaning Dr. Burns most likely. Crawford just says that it's his loss, to which Lillian hesitates but agrees. She bites her lower lip and looks down again before frowning, and before Crawford can comment, she walks over to the velvet chair and lays down on it. She begins quietly crying and quickly falls asleep. She continued attending sessions throughout all of October and November, but in spite of her relationship with Crawford improving, her mental state appeared to remain stagnant outside of sessions, and her productivity was still relatively low. During the months prior, she had refused to address head researcher Burns during routine interviewing, unless explicitly required to, resulting in very little progress in treating her anomalous condition. In spite of Burns' attempts to minimize hostility following the previous incident, Lillian clearly held him in contempt, although it's noted that her contempt towards him should have been described in a more clinical manner. Nonetheless, she didn't engage in any additional hostilities towards any containment staff. On November 24, 2005, several days before Thanksgiving, Crawford made a major breakthrough in Lillian's case, leading to a significant improvement in her psychological state. During the session, Lillian is lying down in the velvet chair with her eyes closed, doing breathing exercises based on Crawford's instructions. She interrupts her, though, saying that she really appreciates her trying to help with these breathing exercises, but she doesn't think they're doing anything for her. Crawford frowns and says that they can always come back to them later, as they're just there to help her calm down, since she's quite the overthinker. Lillian grunts in response, still not sure how much they actually help. Silence ensues as Crawford taps her pen against her face repeatedly, before saying that something new seems to be bothering Lillian today. She looks up, surprised, before lowering her gaze and says that it's nothing. Crawford replies that if she doesn't want to talk about it, she won't push her, but it's important for her to be able to communicate her feelings if she wants her to help. Lillian's eyes widen, but quickly refocus, and she rubs her arm before saying that she's just a bit upset about Thanksgiving. Crawford understands that she's spending it here alone while her coworkers get to go home to their families, calling it simply awful. Lillian agrees, before pausing and remarking that Crawford is pretty good at this, causing the doctor to laugh. She says that it's her job to know these things, and she completely understands. She's had countless clients under her care who went through the same thing she is now. Lillian asks if any of them get to go home for Thanksgiving, causing Crawford to pause and say that most of them don't. Lillian exhales sharply and turns away, asking what the point is then. Crawford adjusts her glasses and tells her that it's not really in her power to be able to help Lillian out of containment. Her job here is to help her overcome these awful feelings she's been having. There's no shame in feeling upset or angry at the circumstances she's been put in, and her feelings are completely natural, especially for a young girl. To let them consume her professional life, though, and to let circumstances control her, that's just no good. Lillian just mumbles and asks what the hell does she do then, causing Crawford to pause momentarily before saying that in her experience, the best thing someone can do when they're in a tough situation is to consider their problems like a challenge. Lillian eventually turns, asking what she means. Crawford smiles and says that she's sure that's not everyone's solution, but she thinks every trial Lillian faces can be tolerable if she just sees it as a challenge. That's how Crawford got her degree, after all. Lillian begins to furrow her eyebrows before her eyes suddenly widen as she takes to the idea of a challenge. She finally looks up and smiles at Crawford, rising to her feet, asking if they can cut today's session short, as she has some work she needs to catch up on. Crawford asks if she doesn't want to continue their conversation about Thanksgiving, but Lillian says that she's okay. Even if she's stuck here for Thanksgiving, she has a feeling she'll see her family for Christmas. Following this exchange, Lillian suddenly saw an extremely high productivity boost, reaching levels similar to its initial containment. Simultaneously, she did not experience any other changes to her depressive symptoms, often going extended periods without engaging in hygienic activities or socializing. On December 9th, Burns interviewed her to ascertain the source of her newfound productivity, although it's noted that it's unclear why he did so, as at the time there was no reason to suspect she had any ulterior motives. She's seated in the interviewing room, with a single guard behind her, as Burns arrives precisely at 10 a.m. She asks him what he wants, and he replies that he's called this special interview because they've noticed that her productivity has seen a sharp increase in recent days. The containment team is curious as to why she's had such a sudden change of heart. She doubts that Dr. Steele cares at all about her, but Burns continues to look at her, so she says that she's just feeling better, and her therapist has been really useful. Burns still doesn't reply, so she admits that he was right, and therapy was helpful, asking if she can go now. Burns replies that despite her sudden productivity, they've noticed her depressive symptoms haven't changed much, and it's not so common for someone to get their act together without fixing the root cause. Lillian just scoffs, stating that she pleads the fifth, to which Burns comments that joking is also quite out of character for her. She grits her teeth in response, causing the security guard to slightly raise their weapon, and she angrily asks if a lady can't just do her job in peace without him worming his way into everything she does. Burns had left out the line about him worming his way into everything she does, prompting the ethics committee to note that it's unclear why he did so, if intentional. After several seconds of silence, Burns sighs and gets up, stating that this meeting is concluded and thanking her for her time. She sarcastically thanks him for wasting her time and is escorted back to her cell. Burns notes afterwards that her sudden change of behavior has him questioning her motives, so they'll have to keep a closer eye on her in the foreseeable future. Her parapsychological counseling sessions have been deemed necessary for her to continue due to her persistent depressive symptoms. For several weeks following her increase in productivity, she didn't socialize at all outside of routine interviews and counseling sessions. She worked overtime for several hours per day as well, including on weekends when she was not assigned work. This activity was noted as strange by containment personnel, meaning Dr. Burns, though it suddenly ceased on December 22nd when her productivity returned to normal. Though she experienced slightly fewer depressive symptoms according to Dr. Crawford, her overall behavior was still considered abnormal. On January 9, 2006, Burns requested and received permission from the Site-17 Containment Oversight Committee to conduct a full audit of SCP-8980 and her containment area. It's noted by the Ethics Committee that the original line in the document was just that Burns received permission to conduct a full audit, obfuscating the origin of the action, which was Burns himself. It's largely believed that by this point in 8980's containment, this use of vague phrasing was largely intentional, even if prior infractions were accidental. Lillian and her room were fully stripped and searched, as was the remote code device used by her to conduct her work. The Ethics Committee notes that this phrasing obfuscates the fact that Lillian was forced to undergo a strip search, including invasive medical scans for potential hazardous materials on person. This was deemed grossly excessive and is in egregious violation of the Foundation Code of Conduct. After a careful 2-day audit of all of her belongings, investigative staff discovered that she had located and exploited an arbitrary code execution in her remote work apparatus over the course of several weeks. This granted her full access to her former SCIP-net account, allowing her access to all of her previously limited utilities, including intra-messaging systems, the secure extra-foundational communication system, and the SCP-8980 file itself. Throughout the latter half of December, she had been in direct contact with several members of Foundation staff, and several sub-Veil individuals, especially her mother. Although the nature of these conversations did not violate any employee protocols, the fact that she was a contained anomaly made conversing with these individuals without approval expressly prohibited. All individuals who interacted with her were administered Class C amnestics. As she abused her Foundation accommodations to facilitate her rule-breaking behavior, consensus from the Containment Oversight Committee concluded that she must either undergo amnestic therapy or have access to her remote work apparatus permanently revoked. Although she was initially against amnestic treatment, Dr. Crawford convinced her to voluntarily accept the treatment, insisting on its efficacy. We're then provided the transcript of the amnesticization, which wasn't present in the original document and normally shouldn't be, but the Ethics Committee is attaching it for contextual and review purposes. The anesthesiologist arrives alongside Burns, who initially believes her to be a nurse, before being quickly corrected. The two engage in light conversation for approximately 20 minutes while waiting for Lillian to be escorted to the chamber. Upon arrival, she's seen to be extremely disheveled, her movements appearing sluggish as she walks, likely from lethargy. She then spots Burns and immediately freezes, before backing away from the lab. She's pushed back in by the guard behind her, and she stumbles to the ground, prompting a laugh from Burns. She repeats the phrase, "not like this," and spends several seconds attempting to crawl away or stand up before laying on the ground unmoving. She then makes eye contact with the anesthesiologist, who says that she understands that this is a bit of a scary process, but it'll be over before she even realizes it. She's done this countless times, and hasn't had any accidents in 10 years. After several seconds of hesitating, Lillian slowly gets to her feet and points at Burns, asking why is he here. Burns interrupts and says that he's required to oversee her amnesticization as per the Foundation's Code of Conduct. He's just here to provide the list of targeted engrams, and he nearly calls the doctor a nurse again before correcting himself. The doctor says that the procedure for Class C amnestics involves a primer injection, where they'll specify the target memories to excise through a fugue state, then a second injection, which will actually do the erasing. Since amnestics usually involve confidential information, Burns needs to be the one to prime her. Burns replies that she'll need to simplify it for her, as she's a computer technician, not a neurologist. The anesthesiologist says that with all due respect, neither is he, and tells Lillian that she'll be in the room the whole time, and the whole session will be recorded. Lillian glances between Burns and the anesthesiologist repeatedly, slowly backing up, and says that she can't do this. She immediately turns and begins running for the door, but is quickly intercepted by the guard, causing her to stumble and fall. The guard then drags Lillian towards the amnestization station, causing her to begin screaming uncontrollably. The anesthesiologist covers her ears in irritation, but Burns does nothing besides watch. The guard secures her to the table as she writhes in place, still screaming, and after several seconds, the anesthesiologist walks towards her. She promises her that it will be quick, with no harm and no foul. Lillian begins to haltingly say something about not letting him, but Burns interrupts, asking if they can begin as he has an appointment soon. Lillian begins sobbing again, asking to be left alone, but the anesthesiologist starts to sterilize her arm for the injections, causing her to tense her arm in fear. She spends several seconds attempting to relax it, to surprising success, and she stops thrashing in apparent defeat, gasping and sobbing without coherency. She's given the local anesthetic and is told that it should fully kick in about 2 to 3 minutes. She makes eye contact with the anesthesiologist, who stops moving, and she begs her not to do this to her, as she doesn't know who he is. She begs her to help and to let her out, as Burns simply watches. The anesthesiologist glances at him, but then quickly pulls away, saying that she's just doing her job, and to take it up with the ethics committee or something. Lillian strains against the restraints, causing the anesthesiologist to glance again at Burns, but she simply says that she's not going to risk her career over a stranger. Lillian falls back and stares ahead, crying silently, as Burns pulls out his mobile device, in violation of his own protocols involving 8980. He quickly puts it away as it appears to not turn on. Several minutes pass by in silence, only broken by her sobs and an occasional grunt by the guard. The procedure takes place, after which Lillian stops struggling but is still visibly shaking and crying. The anesthesiologist tells Burns that it will take a few minutes until she's ready for priming, and he shouldn't say anything once she's ready until they're done, because it could have some nasty side effects. If he says anything besides the primers, they'll have to let the shot wear off and reschedule. Burns watches Lillian in silence as the anesthesiologist files the relevant paperwork, and Lillian spends several minutes shivering and sobbing before being rendered slowly immobile by the shot. She lays there, her jaw slack open, glancing wildly around in terror, and the anesthesiologist gives Burns the thumbs up to begin reciting the primers. He approaches her eyes solely focused on him, as the anesthesiologist puts on foundation-grade earmuffs to ensure that she doesn't hear any classified information. Burns pulls out a folded piece of paper and smiles, stating the first primer, the memory of performing arbitrary code execution exploit in containment. The second is the concept of arbitrary code execution exploits. The third is the memory of contact with her coworkers during containment. Fourth is the memory of contact with her mother during containment. Fifth is the concept of using her remote work apparatus to breach containment. Throughout this, Lillian's body twitches and her eyes dart around the room, leaking tears which mix with the saliva building on her chin. Burns then makes eye contact with her, before looking sideways towards the recording device, and then back towards the anesthesiologist. He leans directly above Lillian, his face inches away, as her breathing becomes extremely labored. After several further moments of silence, he smiles and says another concept, but this time the data has been corrupted. The video and audio feeds severely distort for several seconds, but Lillian is now violently spasming, her eyes entirely unfocused, and her breathing is highly irregular. The anesthesiologist jerks up and reaches for her earmuffs, but then looks to the recording device and hesitantly puts her hands back down. Lillian returns to an inert state after several seconds, though her mouth continually twitches and she continues to loudly moan. Burns turns towards the anesthesiologist and gives her a thumbs up, causing her to get up to prepare the second injection. Lillian appears to recuperate, and her eyes focus as she begins to cry more intensely, making direct eye contact with Burns despite him looking away. As the anesthesiologist locks eyes with Lillian, her mouth twitches intensely, and she looks back to Burns, who just nods sternly. She sighs and injects Lillian with the catalyst, causing her mouth to stop twitching. As the amnestic activates, her consciousness slowly fades, and the anesthesiologist says that she should wake up in a few hours. Burns thanks her as the guard begins to remove Lillian's restraints, and the anesthesiologist hesitantly asks what caused Lillian to emote as she did. Burns interrupts her and says that information is strictly classified, before glancing at his watch and saying that he's now late for his appointment because of how long she took. Burns leaves, and the guard picks up Lillian's limp body, throws her over the shoulder, and exits as well. The anesthesiologist pauses for a moment before snapping herself to attention. She glances at the recording device, but shudders and scratches a discolored patch on her arm as she leaves. The Ethics Committee notes that a full dissection of Burns' actions is attached at the end of this review, but it's clear that he abused the protections assigned to the head researcher position to purposefully amnesticize Lillian of non-essential concepts and memories. One instance of this appears to have been corrupted beyond restoration, which is believed to have been caused by her anomalous capabilities, though this is the first and only time a recorder has been directly affected by the anomaly. The anesthesiologist, whose identity has been purposefully obfuscated here, was later identified and interviewed. Unfortunately, it was revealed that she had been chronically abusing amnestics on herself to erase her own traumatic memories. Nonetheless, she was able to point out that she submitted a complaint to the office of the Site-17 Ethics Committee liaison a day later, but the report wasn't received as the position was vacant at the time. The identity of the guard was also discovered, as despite wearing scramble equipment, it was thought that some information may possibly be learned from them. Unfortunately, the guard was killed in a containment breach in 2013, and a search of his belongings found no relevant evidence. The corrupted concept erased by Burns could not be re-derived by the Ethics Committee review team. Following Lillian's amnesticization, her mental state significantly deteriorated to the point of her not fulfilling any of her quotas, nor responding to any work inquiries. In response, she was required to attend her parapsychological counseling on a bi-weekly basis. The committee notes that this should have stated twice weekly to be more clear, as later in her containment, the term bi-weekly had been misinterpreted by containment personnel. Dr. Crawford made another breakthrough on January 16th, as she sits at her desk, slowly searching through 8980's files. By this point, several prior attempts to start a conversation had previously failed, as Lillian lies in the velvet chair, unmoving, staring at the ceiling. Crawford finds the recent report on Lillian and spends several minutes reading it, even though this should have been done prior to the session. Her expression grows grave, and she comments that the amnestics got her down. Lillian slightly turns her head towards Crawford, who says that she remembers her first time with amnestics. Of course, she doesn't remember exactly what she saw, but it must have been horrifying. She walked up to that amnestics table and practically injected herself, Lillian turns her head away again, causing Crawford to frown, and she says that she can imagine it wasn't so pleasant for her, remarking that it was voluntary though. Lillian's face briefly appears to contort, but she doesn't otherwise react. Crawford continues, telling her that if she keeps her emotions locked in all the time, she'll just end up exploding. She needs to open up about what's bothering her, and she can trust her, just like any other old lady. Lillian shivers, and her eyes widen as she begins to say something before pausing. She shivers again, and says that he took something from her. Crawford asks if she means Burns again, causing Lillian to just nod. Crawford sighs and tells her that if she keeps blaming her problems on that man, she'll never be able to overcome this victim mentality that she's built up for herself. She's often heard, in her line of work, that some reality benders torment themselves with their anomalous abilities subconsciously because they believe they deserve punishment. They find ways to make their own lives miserable. Lillian's eyes widen in response, and she says that she's not, as Crawford hastily apologizes and says that she knows she's not, as they tested her for that. She was just bringing it up because sometimes the fault does lie within. It's a difficult truth to swallow, but rarely does stuff happen that we truly can't help. Lillian shivers again and says that she doesn't know. Crawford remarks that she was amnesticized because she tried to breach containment, although obviously Lillian doesn't remember. Crawford looks down at the briefing again, sighing, which makes Lillian flinch. Crawford says that she's sure Lillian could eventually argue for lighter restrictions if she practices more restraint. For herself, knowing when to shut her mouth is how she got to where she is now, so sometimes you just need to turn the other cheek, as they say, even if you know you're right. Only then will you finally be able to get ahead. Lillian doesn't respond, though tears begin to stream down her face. Crawford looks up and apologizes, saying that she didn't mean to make her cry and she was getting too personal. She then glances at the clock and says that she hates to do this to her, but their time is coming to an end for today. It pains her to break it off at such an emotional moment, but she has other clients that sorely need her too. The Foundation can be a cruel place for all of them. She then sighs again before lightly chuckling, saying that she supposes their emotional little brains are just like the Foundation itself. No matter how hard of a job they do, there's always work to be done. Crawford then gets up to close the session, but stops when she sees Lillian's expression. Her eyes are wide and her mouth hangs open as she repeats that there's always work to be done. Following this session, Lillian's productivity increased to perfectly match her quota, but her depressive symptoms only appear to increase as she spends no time on entertainment or socialization, opting to stay in bed the remainder of the day. Nonetheless, Dr. Crawford was commended by the Containment Oversight Committee for her contribution towards improving Lillian's productivity, despite shortcomings. We're then given another transcript of a video that was obtained from the Deep Well archive, which was not present in the original file, but is presented here by the Ethics Committee without comment. On March 10, 2006, Lillian is sitting in a chair in her containment chamber, slumped forward and staring directly at the floor. The door to the chamber then opens, and Dr. Burns enters, although Lillian does not react. He spends several seconds closing the door behind him before watching her silently, until he eventually apologizes for being a few days late, as she knows how traffic can be. He says that she was the one who requested to meet with him, so she should be grateful that he's even giving her the time of day, especially on her terms. He does warn her, though, that he has a taser on him, so if she tries anything, it will hurt. Lillian still doesn't respond, so he crosses his arms in frustration, stating that if wasting his time is her idea of petty revenge, they both know that he can do a lot worse. She then takes a deep, racked sigh, crying silently as she tries to speak. She begins to shiver as Burns reaches for his taser, but then she looks up at him and says that he wins. Burns doesn't react, and she continues to breathe quickly, lowering her gaze, repeating that he wins. He still does not react, and her sobs increase in intensity as she says that she'll do anything he wants. She just wants to go back to how it was. She'll give him everything she owns, everything in her bank account and in her room. She'll draw loans for him that she can't pay back and give him her paycheck. She'll work whatever assignment he gives her and let him take credit for all her papers. She'll be his secretary, bring him his morning coffee and make him his sandwiches. She'll lick his shoes. Burns still does not react, and she watches his expression fervently for any emotion before sobbing and lowering her gaze. She then whispers that she'll even sleep with him. Burns still does not react, but slowly begins to smile. Lillian looks up hopefully at him, but her expression begins to fall as Burns says nothing in response, so she just whispers, "Please." Burns begins to laugh loudly for several seconds, gripping his stomach and bending over at the waist. Lillian falls off of her chair and begins to back away in fear. After nearly 30 seconds of laughing, he recomposes himself, wiping a tear from his eye. He states that that's hilarious, and hearing her say those words shows just how pathetic she's become, and how pathetic she always really was. He begins to walk towards her as she crawls backwards, her back hitting the wall. He stands in front of her before crouching to meet her eye level. He says that she really doesn't get it. If he wanted to sleep with her, he would have done so by now, although he uses a more vulgar term than I have. She doesn't respond, and he smiles, stating that he already has everything he could ever want from her. He then gets up without further comment, as Lillian stares blankly ahead, weeping. He stops at the door, glancing back, and tells her a happy first-year anniversary, and here's to many more. He smiles smugly to himself before exiting the chamber. After an hour and a half of no activity, the remote work apparatus in her chamber prints its workday schedule, and she slowly lifts herself off the floor, getting ready for work. On December 12, 2014, head researcher Burns chose to retire, and as per Foundation succession standards, Dr. Morgan McFarrell assumed the role of head researcher for 8980. On January 5, 2015, McFarrell conducted 8980's routine yearly testing, as per her special containment procedures. And after several rounds of testing, McFarrell discovered that 8980 possessed none of her stated anomalous properties. This was confirmed after several additional rounds of testing. 3 days later, McFarrell conducted an interview with her, during which he noted that she possessed several alarming features, including extreme apathy, severe technophobia, and a lack of social awareness. After spending several days confirming that she was directly and indirectly subject to long-term abuse and negligence, McFarrell filed a formal ethics committee complaint regarding her treatment under Burns. After obtaining a warrant of investigation from the O5 Council, a formal investigation was launched on January 14, 2015. As of January 19, 2015, Lillian began rehabilitation and reintegration into the wider Foundation workplace under direct supervision from McFarrell, with her pending reclassification to neutralized. We're then provided the SCP-8980 investigation summary from the Ethics Committee specialists. Based on both 8980's documentation and external resources found by the review team, it is clear that Dr. Christopher Burns engaged in severe, deliberate abuse of an anomaly over an extended period of time. Although extensive, a full list of irrefutable violations consists of the following: misuse of formal position to extort, manipulate, or otherwise negatively affect other members of Foundation staff, failure to recuse himself from sensitive matters in which he had clear conflicts of interest, misuse of official documentation to present false or inaccurate information, intentional obfuscation of details in official documentation, abuse of an anomaly, sexual harassment of an anomaly, gross negligence of an anomaly, extreme testing of a sentient anomaly, deliberate intimidation of an anomaly, public disclosure of private information of an anomaly, gross misuse of amnestics, and violation of prior Ethics Committee stop order. Although these violations alone are egregious and numerous, they likely do not represent the full breadth of infractions committed by Burns, as several could not be proven, and further violations were likely committed in the containment of other anomalies. Although the review team has attempted to identify the full scope and scale of Burns' infractions, this investigation has largely been impeded by Site-17 administration's non-compliance and the O5 Council's unwillingness to expand its investigative warrant. Unfortunately, Burns cannot be sentenced, as due to the ethical post-amnesticization punishment ruling, Burns cannot be punished for actions taken prior to major amnesticization, as he would not be able to remember committing them. Dr. Rachel Steele was also found to be in violation of the Foundation Code of Conduct, particularly the section concerning gross negligence of an anomaly. As she was not the head researcher and did not possess prior infringements on her record, the review team recommends the standard escalation and dock of 1 week of pay, as well as requiring 3 months of remedial therapy. Dr. Morgan McFarrell was found to be in violation of the Foundation Code of Conduct as well, but it's the consensus of the review team, meaning 2 of the 4 members, that McFarrell should not receive an infringement on his record. Dr. Nadine Crawford has already been removed from Foundation staff. As a result, the 8980 review team would like to make the following recommendations for future Ethics Committee proposals to rectify this case. Provide monetary compensation to 8980 for the abuse she suffered under Burns. Provide free parapsychological counseling to 8980 for the remainder of her tenure at the Foundation. And request the Fire Suppression Department to soft monitor 8980 in order to properly reintegrate her back into the Foundation's workplace environment. Additionally, some structural changes would be beneficial to propose to the wider Foundation as a whole, as Foundation motions. File a Foundation motion to require Ethics Committee review of any staff member who wishes to undergo amnestic therapy upon retirement. File a Foundation motion to expand the ability of the Ethics Committee to promote liaisons to sites without site director approval. And request an investigative warrant from the O5 Council to investigate all of Site-17's administration. The chairman of the Ethics Committee, upon receiving the report, thanks them for their invaluable efforts, and informs them that all of the suggested Ethics Committee proposals have passed the initial Ethics Committee review process. They will each be voted upon accordingly, and the Foundation motions will be put up for vote at the next annual Intercommittee Council session, should they be approved by the Ethics Committee as a whole. The following month, the chairman states that all 3 Ethics Committee proposals have passed. The first, to financially compensate Lillian, was decided to provide her with $470,000, as opposed to the standard for similar cases, with the primary concerns being the recent budget deficit and the low profile of the case. The second, to provide her with counseling, is stated to be standard practice, although a few voted against it over concerns that her experience with Dr. Crawford may result in additional traumatizing experiences. The third, to have the Fire Suppression Department soft monitor her, was stated to be largely irrelevant, as the Fire Suppression Department was already monitoring her case for several years. All actions taken by them have been reviewed and deemed within specified ethical limits. As for the Foundation motions, the ones to have a review of any staff member wishing to undergo amnestics upon retirement and to get a warrant from the O5 Council to investigate all of Site-17's administration have passed. The motion to expand the ability of the Ethics Committee to promote liaisons without Site Director approval has failed, however, as the opposition cites concerns that this policy would disrupt power balance between the O5 Council, the Ethics Committee, and the Site Directors Committee, unnecessarily inflaming tensions across the Foundation. A few months later, after the Foundation Committee's conference, the two Foundation motions that were put forth were both denied. The first was vetoed by the Site Directors Committee, expressing disapproval for it and claiming that the motion was an effort by the Ethics Committee to take power from the Site Directors. The warrant for the Site-17 investigation was denied by the O5 Council, with the majority who rejected it simply commenting that Site-17 is doing its job as intended. The chairman of the Ethics Committee states that unfortunately their hands are tied once again, and he'll be keeping this case open indefinitely in the event any future progress is made in investigating any of Burns' other activities. He wants to once again extend his gratitude to their incredible review team for their hard work in bringing this case to light, as their efforts are invaluable in keeping the Foundation a safe place. 2 years later, a message is sent from Dr. Morgan McFarrell to Flora Marinos, the Site-17 Ethics Committee liaison. He states that he wishes he could say he's made more progress on Lillian's rehabilitation, but the past month hasn't been too kind on her. He does have a few new things to report, however. First, the new program she recommended for counseling wasn't effective, as 2 minutes in, Lillian suffered another panic attack, and the second go-around was even worse. At the present rate, they're going to run out of new therapists at Site-17 in about a month. Long distance is basically infeasible until they can stabilize her technophobia enough to get her on a computer for more than an hour at a time. In terms of work, she's still pretty much incapable of doing anything productive, but he can't really blame her for that. Doing a division's worth of labor every week for a third of your life will absolutely burn you out. But he can't get Director Thompson off his case unless her work gets done, so he's bit the bullet and just started doing her work for her. It's absolutely agonizing to have to work overtime every single day, but he can't really do much about it, as the director has already denied his transfer request. Finally, as for her condition in general, she's still mostly the same, but he's made a little bit of progress. For one, she's finally stopped compulsively calling him Sir, which was a bit funny at first, but got weird really quick. The random bouts of screaming haven't stopped though, and neither has her tendency to stare at him while he sleeps, but they've become less frequent. If there's any hope for progress, it's in that, though if they're only seeing this kind of progress 2 years in, they've still got a ways to go. He wouldn't dare tell anyone else this, but he thinks he's really starting to resent her. He's been de facto co-opted into being her full-time caretaker, and frankly, she's been a real pain in his ass. Between doing her work and chores for her and dealing with her severe neuroses all day, every day, she's completely worn him down to the point that he can't even respect her as a person anymore, much less a coworker. He hates to say it, but he's honestly this close to just calling it quits and letting her rot. Sending this email is probably the dumbest thing he'll ever do in his career, but he really needed to get this off of his chest. He knows that she said the committee's hands are tied, but if there's anything she can do, please help him out. He's not sure how much longer he can handle this psychotic woman. The last line of the document has the person viewing the document, Liaison Marinos, logging out, providing us a link to SCP-8777. SCP-7777 is an article in which a handful of Foundation members, including Marinos, coordinate to whistleblow on all of the Foundation's corruption, notably the O5 Council, but also the Ethics Committee itself. It's likely then that SCP-8980 was a very big catalyst for Marinos to look further into corruption amidst the Foundation, as the events of that article begin in 2018. It's somewhat of a silver lining, I suppose, then, that the absolute horror and tragedy that occurred to Lillian might have prevented countless other similar occurrences. The SCP universe is largely that of horrors, and while most of the time we think of those as being indescribable and unfathomable, here we have a horror that's all too real. Yes, this article does take place within an organization associated with the paranatural, and yes, it does specifically involve a male superior concocting an elaborate ruse in order to torment a female underling, but by and large, it's about man's inhumanity towards man. There are a number of individuals throughout this story that either ignore Lillian's plight or otherwise assist in her torment. And while Burns is the central focus, as he apparently fabricated her entire anomaly in the first place, or possibly was anomalous himself, very few within the Foundation come off looking positive here. I've mentioned in other videos that I believe there is a subgenre of horror stories that I dub despair stories, where the intent of the creator is to fill the audience with a feeling of despair, with no hope. That's exactly what Lillian felt for many years, working endlessly in containment while being routinely abused and forgotten. Burns was clearly misogynistic towards pretty much every female character here, but it's also implied that part of his rationale towards doing all this was simple jealousy, as he took 12 years to get his level 3 credentials and she only took 5. According to the author, he believes that Lillian eventually does recover after a long and difficult road, but the fact that she underwent that at all is nothing less than an atrocity.